welcome to another episode of Why Do I with me, Uday Jhala, a series of podcasts where I attempt to venture deep into a poor, unsuspecting person's soul and hope to miraculously escape from the other side relatively unscathed. When I first had the idea of doing this podcast, it was no surprise that my next guest was right at the very top of my wish list. So why has it taken this long? Well, timing is everything. And there can't be a better time to have this conversation than when her debut novel is about to be launched. In fact, pre-orders for the book have just gone live. We will also chat about how writing is such an effective and powerful form of expression. The written word can really be so influential in molding perceptions and instigating debate. Writer, poet, model, activist, actor, entrepreneur, but perhaps most crucially, my karaoke partner in crime. Welcome to the show, Karuna, Ezara, Parikh. Finally, I've got you on as a guest. It's been long overdue. In case you guys hear any strange sounds in the background, some birds or bees or rain, I've actually traveled to Goa to record this one. I'm in the middle of a jungle. It's quite beautiful all around me. So it gives a nice different vibe. Karuna, you're in Calcutta as you've been for the last few years.
I am.
How have you been holding up these last few months?
It's been all right. I'll say it's definitely been better over the last 24 hours. As you mentioned, my book just went live for pre-orders and that has significantly cheered me up. And it's raining here as well, so it's nice weather. How are you doing? How's Goa?
Goa's been nice. It's been relaxing. I've actually been meeting human beings for the first time in like 5 months, which I never thought would be such a stressful thing, to actually be surrounded by people. I'm actually I think I might need to go crawl back into my hole where I came from. It's actually mentally kind of changed your perspective, this whole COVID quarantine time.
Absolutely. But you know me, Jhala, I've always been the person who kind of avoids human beings. So this time has been quite comfortable for me in a strange way. In fact, for me, the realization has been that I might actually meet people. And so I think we're all learning new things in this time.
And I think that's a good segue, because the form of expression that you are now using these days doesn't require a single human being around you. And It's so exciting that your book is coming out, and I've already pre-ordered it, by the way. So just to let you know, you've got my support. And I'm excited to read it because I know that you're a phenomenal writer, and this is just going to be amazing. So I'm so excited for you, and you just continue to astound. And I'm excited to see what happens next. So what's happening with the book? What's the latest? What's going on right now?
So this is a really exciting time because I've been working on this book for 13 years of my life. I think I wrote the first sentence about 13 years ago, and it went through various publishers. In that time, it went through various editors. I actually signed book deals and then backed out of them because, it wasn't working for me and I didn't feel the book was what I wanted it to be. And about 3 years ago, I shifted to Calcutta, as you know. And at that point, Calcutta it's a very quiet city, compared to, say, a Delhi or a Bombay. It can be quite maddening, I think, for most people. But I took a lot of refuge in that. And it actually gave me the mental space to sit down and finally write this book. And so I spent the last few years writing it and handed it over to my agent. And then it's a fairly long process. I won't get into the boring details of how long it takes and why it takes that long. But eventually, it all builds up to what happened yesterday, which is the book goes live for pre-orders and will be out soon. So I'm pretty much flying right now. And like you said, writing it's a really, really solitary activity, right? In fact, the more peace and quiet you get, the more alone time you get, the better it is for your writing. But it can be extremely isolating, and so actually this is the fun time because this is the time I get to celebrate with people, even if it's over a Zoom call or even if it's just, my family calling me from Delhi and Germany and congratulating me. So that's actually a very nice feeling.
But it astounds me, like 13 years, I can't even wrap my head around what that means. Aren't you like a different human being from when you started the book to now? Is it like a different piece of art now, or is it you still had the similar kind of thought process from the time that you conceptualized the idea?
Oh, completely different. You're so right. When I started writing it, I was very young, and I think that's partly the reason why I couldn't publish it at the time. I was trying to tackle topics that were way beyond me, and it's in essence it's a love story, but I didn't know enough about love at that point either. What 21-year-old does know about love in depth? We think we do, and we think that heartbreak we experience at that age is the worst thing we're ever going to go through. But as we all know, we grow up, and it seems like quite a little joke, right? So I think I needed these years to actually do the homework and I like to call it the bone work, actually, because it's so internal, and it's just a lot of growing up and stretching of your soul, really, more than anything else. And eventually, I think you learn enough, you absorb enough to actually tell the story you want to. And that's what happened with me. The book is completely different. Yes, there are some lines and paragraphs that I've retained from the original, but overall, it is a completely different book. And it's interesting that we're talking today, because perhaps last week I wouldn't have had as much perspective on my own writing, but I have had the time in the last week, and especially with the events of yesterday, to kind of just absorb everything that I've gone through in these last few years, especially vis-a-vis my writing. And yesterday was important, not just because my book went live, but my novel went live, but because I also, unbeknownst to most people, I also submitted the first draft of my poetry book to my agent yesterday. And I sat back and I was actually thinking about my own journey as a writer. And I think I accepted myself as a writer of poetry far before I accepted myself as someone who was going to be the author of a novel. And there's many reasons for that. Poetry is a quicker medium. It is shorter. It is, especially with social media today, it's much easier to put out your poems. You don't need a publisher, perhaps. But I don't know if you remember the Paris poem.
Yeah, that was a big moment, I remember, yeah.
Yeah, that was really big.
I mean, in terms of world affairs as well, but also specifically for you and what that did for you when you put that poem out.
Yeah, so it was 2015, and the Paris attacks took place, the coordinated terrorist attack across the city of Paris. And I remember I put out a poem that morning, and I think we were all meeting that night, actually. And by the time we met that night, that poem had been shared 100,000 times across the world. And I think by the end of the week, it was read by 10 million plus people, or those were the statistics I was given from Twitter at the time. And that was, it changed things for me personally. It changed things, obviously, in my public profile. I suddenly had a lot more followers on social media. I had followers that scanned the entire world. So things like that. But on a very personal level, what it changed for me, which I think I've only recently come to terms with, is the idea that I am a poet. Because people started saying this young poet from India, Karuna, Parikh, and I never referred to myself as a poet. But when I heard other people saying that, I kind of began to accept that maybe I am a poet. And there is, I don't know why, do you feel that we do that? Like, I feel we don't take ownership of ourselves. I do think it's something maybe to do with our generation, but especially because these are not careers that are easy to explain. It's not like saying, oh, I'm a lawyer, oh, I do this. And so I think it happens also because I do so many different things. I sometimes don't know how to introduce myself. But when I started being called a poet, it gave me license to say I am a poet. And then I had to accept it internally. And then I had to start working on that, So I do think that was a bigger turning point, even though poems are so much smaller than a novel. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I'm sure you never saw that coming at that moment, and you never realized that that's going to be a tool that you're going to be able to use now in the future to raise awareness, to enact change, to just get the word out there. And now so many people can follow your poems, your posts, your social media, and actually be more aware of something that they may not have been before. And I think that's just such a powerful tool to have at your disposal.
Oh, it definitely is. And, I don't take for granted that I have all these people following me, and they all kind of do often look for how I'm going to maybe frame certain political events or what I'm going to say about them. But I won't deny that comes with a certain amount of pressure as well. For example, uh, sometimes things take place and I don't have an opinion about it, or I might have an opinion about it, but I'm not ready to share it publicly, because every time you share something publicly, there's also a certain amount of backlash, because not everyone is going to agree with you and not everyone has to. And that's fine. But not everyone who doesn't agree with you is going to engage with you in a polite or decent manner, So it's also, it can also be like, it can be extremely traumatic. And I think you and I once spoke about you personally going through that as well, right?
Yeah.
What was it? You had once put up something, a political opinion about something, and I think you got a great amount of backlash for it, right?
Yeah, that was my one and only sort of my foray into posting anything remotely political. Usually, I have pretty superficial, inane social media content, so I can pretty much understand what people go through on a daily basis. Who, like you said, you've got that pressure to to have an opinion on any situation. And when I put something out, it was about I remember when this sort of India Pakistan thing had happened, and they had attacked some of the soldiers, and we had retaliated, and there was this big kind of patriotic fervor, nationalistic fervor on social media, where everybody was like, yes, Jai Hind, and down with Pakistan, and they were all cheering this act of war as if it's like this amazing thing we've done. And my whole post was, yeah, why don't we celebrate? Why don't we celebrate loss of life? Why don't we celebrate an act of war? Why don't we celebrate everything sort of like miserable? Let's throw a big party. And wow, the kind of backlash I got, where people call me unpatriotic, they call me anti-national. I had kids. Like, I remember there was like a 14-year-old kid or something who threatened to come in the middle of the night and stab me to death, like based on that one post. So, and I immediately chickened out, pulled down the post, and said, okay, I don't think I'm going to get into this anymore. So I can't even imagine the pressure that you're under when you've got that many followers. And you know that everything, you've got to measure every word you say pretty carefully, I imagine.
Yeah, and I'm only human. I often don't. I often put out my words in a fit of passion, and I don't realize how maybe something could hurt someone. And there's many times, of course, where there's no reason for someone to get as upset as they do, or send me, say, rape threats or death threats, or I'm also worried about the fact that my address and phone number can be easily found, perhaps out there, and those are the things that are actually terrifying. And there have been times where loved ones have said to me, be a little careful about what you're putting out there. And I often have to weigh that up with, okay, I want to be careful, and I want to also be cognizant of the fact that people might think differently from me, people whom I respect. But I also need to put out what I feel, and also feel the responsibility to be a voice for those things, and to maybe spread certain ideas that people feel, but they sometimes don't know how to express. And it took me a long time to understand that that is what the power of writing is, that people feel these things, but they don't know how to put them out in words. And that's why when you do put them out in words for people who feel those things, those words can travel, and they are transported, and they are amplified, because you become a voice for those people. And that is a privilege. So I try not to misuse that privilege. But, I also think that we focus a lot on the really dark side of social media as a generation. There's so much focus on how it's negative, and how it spreads negativity, and but like you said, it's so powerful. It's a powerful tool. And I've had some incredible things happen through social media. I've made very deep friendships over social media. I've made connections with people whom I've never met in real life. So let's just take the Paris poem example. So the Paris poem had massive impact worldwide. And sure, there was a lot of amazing media coverage, and that meant big things for me, to be on the BBC, to be on MTV America, to be on things like that. That was big. But what was bigger were things like getting letters from, Iraqi refugees living in the United States for 23 years now, saying, this is the poem I wish someone had written when I was traveling to America as a young boy and I had nothing, or, Mexican immigrants writing to me. I had people from South America writing to me. It was incredible to see the impact and to see how you can create human connection, and that is the beautiful side of social media and the internet, right? And we often tend to forget that. I remember there was a poem I wrote. It's actually, I wish I could read it out to you, but there was a poem I wrote. It was just about healing after loss, and I put this up, and one of the lines is in the poem, because a friend of mine actually, so the backstory to the poem is this: a friend had written to me and said, I've just ended a relationship and I don't know how to heal. How do I get over this? And I wrote her a poem and I sent it to her. And I also put it up on social media without tagging her or anything to respect her privacy. But one of the lines in the poem was, everything you wish that they would do for you, you do for you now. And it said, then you buy a ticket to the place that you thought you would go with your lover. And I got this beautiful message in my inbox the day after I put it up. And it was a girl from North Carolina. And she said, I have recently ended a relationship and I'm having a very, very hard time going out or doing anything or getting over it. And I read your poem, and my favorite musical had come to town, and her favorite musical was Rent. And it had come to town. And she said, I really wanted to go. And I read your poem, and there was an hour to the show. And I got online and I bought the last single seat ticket and I went for it. And, that's, for me, that is the power of words, No,
and I think you're absolutely right. And now, sorry, you guys might hear some rain in the background, but that's the trade-off. And you're absolutely right. I think we focus on internet trolls and death threats and all the negative aspect, but the trade-off that you get must be so wonderful when you realize that it's actually having a real, genuine impact. I remember you and I worked on something together when I was coaching the girls from the slums, and you used, again, your influence and your power of social media and Instagram to actually get them shoes to play football for the first time. They could actually kick with actual proper shoes and a proper kit. And so it makes it all worth it when you see something like that.
Yeah, that's the thing, that you can actually mobilize audiences in such a personal way. I remember that. I remember the day we took the shoes to the girls. That was amazing. It was actually Christmas, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was really wonderful because I remember it was really cold those mornings, and you'd been waking up at 5 o'clock to take these Ektara girls to train them for a football team. And I remember you telling me that most of them play barefoot, and that's crazy to me. And I think Adidas sponsored the entire team. And that was such a beautiful moment. But, there have been so many other incidents like that, whether it was the Kerala floods. I think we raised 2 lakhs in 2 days, and that was amazing. Recently, something else happened. There's a really sweet dog called Ruby, the special one, on Instagram. And Ruby has lost use of her 2 hind legs. And so she needed to get an operation recently. And I remember just starting to forward her little cause to all my friends. And I think within a day, we'd raised the money for her surgery. And so I think that one can actually mobilize if you use the right words. And that's kind of what I hope to do with my book in a much, much bigger way,
Yeah, let's talk about the book. The Heart Asks Pleasure First. I love that name. I love the artwork on the cover. It's looking beautiful. So, I mean, what was the inspiration? How did you think about this? Where did it come about? Thematically, like, what's the premise of the novel?
So the title is taken from an Emily Dickinson poem. And interestingly, this poem the title was actually used for a track on the soundtrack of the film The Piano. And Michael Nyman, who created the soundtrack, he loved this title of her poem and he used it there. And so I'm actually the second person to use it for a different piece of art. But it's quite lovely and connected because that piece of piano music has always been really, really special to me. So that's where I got the title. And interestingly, Jhala, I always knew what the title of the book was going to be, even when I didn't have a book. I just knew that this was going to be it. It moved me so much. The book it's actually about a relationship between an Indian Hindu girl and a Pakistani Muslim boy, but it isn't set in either of their countries. It's set in Wales. The reason it's set in Wales is because I went to university there. And so it was familiar to me, and I could actually describe the geography and landscape of the city of Cardiff very easily. So for familiarity, I placed it there. But the other thing it does to place an Indian and a Pakistani together in a foreign land is that it breaks down barriers. And we know that. All of us have traveled abroad. And, when we've traveled abroad, we've often encountered Pakistanis, which is not something we get to do in our own country ever. We might be at a restaurant and bump into a Spanish girl. We might bump into a Polish guy, but we never bump into a Pakistani person just visiting, right? That doesn't happen. So I think that was one of the really fascinating things for me about being in the West, was that I could meet Pakistani people and I could interact with them. And that's one of the reasons why it's set there, because it allows for Daya and Aftab, the two characters, to fall in love with each other. And what follows is all the problems that you would expect from such a relationship, all the societal problems. But in order to make it a little more complicated, I've set the story in 2001. Now, 2001 was a year when I think so much changed around the world. September 11th it just knocked the feet out from under the world, and it was like, okay, what is going to happen now? And I think there's a very distinct before and after when you think about September 11th. There's a before and after to how we think about Islam. There's a before and after to how we thought about America, how we thought about refugees and Muslims. And it's fascinating what that did in India, because I think something interesting that happened is that in India before September 11th, of course, there's always been Islamophobia in India. It's been there since partition. But I think after September 11th, it became such a global war against Islam that India had that backing. And I think people who had to keep their feelings about Muslims kind of undercover in India suddenly felt very brave about saying what they wanted, and it changed that perspective. And I thought it was very interesting to see what this global sort of massive international event had what the impact was in India itself. So that's where the story is rooted. And it ties in a lot with so many of my beliefs, about equality, about secularism. And I've tried to say all those things in the form of fiction in this book. So that's what it's about.
Super excited to read about it. But you're absolutely right. And when you're talking about how people now are emboldened, right, to be even more divisive, even sort of, and it's not, I don't think it just narrows just down to Islamophobia. I think it's any kind of minorities now. And you look all over the world in all kinds of countries, there's this populist leaders coming up and trying to just divide humanity. And you're right, there's a before 9/11 and an after 9/11 mindset, and that's permeated to where India is today. And a lot of the stuff that's going on here, I mean, you've been actively involved with the CAA protests, and that's another thing that you've helped mobilize a lot of people to be aware of and to protest alongside with you as well. I mean, that ties in really nicely with your book in terms of the mindset of where people are today.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, my involvement with the anti-CAA movement was also very simply based on, again, my ideologies and being consistent with them. I couldn't have written this book and also not stood up, at the time when the CAA announcements came. I do think it's actually a kind of heartbreaking what's happening around the world. Wherever we look, we're seeing, like you said, this sort of authoritarian regimes coming up. We're seeing a lot of protests. We're seeing people feeling the need to stand up against it. So we're seeing a mobilization on both sides. But what really scares me is that there are enough people voting these leaders into power.
Because they're feeding off their fears. They're feeding off their basic fears. Completely. And they're whipping up this hate within them. And now they're sort of blinded by that. You know what I mean?
Oh, completely. I think it's all of it boils down to fear of the other, and it's so interesting when you look at the facts and you look at the numbers and you look at statistics, when they show you, for example, when people are like, oh my God, black people and brown people are taking over the UK. And then you look at the actual percentage of black and brown people in the UK and you're like, yeah, you're 95% white. What is going on? Why is there this fear? But there is this very deep fear in places, even in India, they're like, oh, the Muslims, they're going to take over. And I mean, again, the numbers, they tell you what you need to know. The Muslims are not even 14 or 15% of this country. They are always going to be a minority. Even if all Hindus stopped having children today, Muslims would have to have children for 250 years to take over. So I don't actually understand where the fears are coming from. But I guess it is a lack of information and education. And we all know there's also the tech side to blame, and there's also sort of the fake news media.
Yeah.
It is really, really scary. But this is also one of the reasons why I feel the need to keep raising my voice and keep putting my words out there. Because every time I think, oh, someone else will say it, or oh, it's too scary for me to say it, or oh, I should watch my back, or oh, I'm being too mouthy, or oh, do I even know what I'm talking about? I see these things and I think, even if these 2 sentences that I write have some impact on one person out there, if it makes somebody pause in their day and think, why not? And I also think that there are different ways of putting out this information. And the one thing that I've seen doesn't work is a sense of shame. There's no point shaming the other.
Yeah.
I don't think that works. I think that we need to approach this with love and kindness and education, because we're all victims here, including the people who believe differently from us.
No, and we've had this conversation in the past as well, where I've been almost like of this mindset, and I know a lot of people probably think the same way, and it doesn't really help when you think that, oh, but if I say anything or if I do anything, will it really make a difference? Who's going to listen? What's it going to change? Everybody's already set in their mindset. I've got this thing that this hate and fear mongering was always there bubbling under the surface, and now people are just emboldened to actually speak out because, okay, the government's telling me it's okay. Now I can come out and do and behave the same way, almost with impunity and with no fear of kind of what will happen, because they know that the leaders have the same thought process. But I think you're right. Even if you're changing one opinion, or if you're just making one person think, isn't that enough at the end of the day? I think that you're right. That probably is more than enough. You don't need to have a platform of 100,000, 200,000 followers to make an impact.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's interesting because the name of your show is Why Do I? And before we started talking, I was thinking, why do I do what I do? And I think you've answered it for me. That's exactly why I keep doing the things I do. And yes, it is scary. And yes, it is. Sometimes it's exhausting. But I think that's why I continue to do it, because I believe in change and I believe in a better world. And I do believe that my tools for doing that it's my writing, it's my pen and paper. And if I can use them for that, then why not? Right?
Yeah, and I think people underestimate how powerful writing is. I mean, as a form of expression, as a form of protest. I don't think you've read it yet, but I am reading My Seditious Heart still. I know I've been telling you I've been reading it for a while, but it's a bit of a long one because there's so much to unpack. But it's very similar. The kind of essays that Arundhati Roy has been writing for the last 20 plus years is all about raising awareness about what is happening in our country, especially, and how we are blinded by misinformation, by what the government is feeding us or by what the news outlets are feeding us, and we're not. And the common man is just not getting the right information.
Oh, absolutely. But, there is a part 2 to that. There's a second half, and people don't often talk about that. So, you said you're reading My Seditious Heart. And as you know, my husband, Amitesh, he read it over Christmas and he absolutely loved it. And he would actually read bits of it out to me every night. And I actually wrote to Arundhati Roy and told her this. And she called it seditious pillow talk, which I thought was a lovely phrase. But yeah, we would have this seditious pillow talk between us. And so I had a taste of the book, but I haven't read the book. And I think that is part two, that, there are people doing the writing. There are people putting out these incredible essays. They're doing the research. They're putting their lives at risk. Whether it's a Rana Ayub, whether it's an Arundhati Roy, and so many others, that are not big names. The reason they're not big names and the reason we don't know these things is because we're not reading. And I think that's part two. The writing is important, but the written word only has power when it is read, and I think it's heartbreaking for me how few people are actually reading these days. And I always say books need people. Without them, books are just paper. There's no point. There's no information that's being transferred if it's not being read. So I honestly, to anyone listening, I would actually say go out and read. And one thing that drives me crazy is, people often see me reading because I always have a book on me, and wherever I am, be it a coffee shop, be it a friend's house, I've got my book open on my lap. You've seen it plenty of times, Jhala. And people look over at me wistfully and they say, oh, I wish I had the time to read. And I want to tell them I'm one of the busiest people you'll ever meet. I am constantly working on 10 different projects. You know this, right?
Yeah.
But I make the time to read. And reading is, it's like meditation. You have to kind of work on it. It's a stilling of the mind. You have to sit with the book. You have to become one with it, and you have to give yourself to it, and then it gives back. But people forget that reading is obviously not easy because we are no longer trained with our minds to sit down and be still. And I think so much of, our minds they're used to fast images. They're used to, listening to shows. They're used to like noise and music, and they're very active, and they're very sort of hungry for constant stimulation, but faster stimulation. But reading, it's a much slower, gentler act. So I do think that people need to make the time to actually read. And it does something incredible to you. It actually opens up a part of you that you didn't even know exists. And for me, what's incredible is if you don't know something, you can know it just by reading. It is the most empowering thing in the world. And when I write, my hope is obviously that people will read it.
Where would my mother be without her book club?
Exactly.
But I think even, of course, I mean, reading it's so amazing, and I'm trying to get back into it. And I think these lockdown times have helped me actually take a pause, appreciate, take some time, whether that's in a book or whether I'm trying to pick up a new skill or just be silent, just appreciate nature, whatever it may be. I think we've just stopped doing that as a people in general. Nobody takes a pause to just appreciate anything anymore.
So honestly, if anything, this lockdown has, I think, given more people the time and the space to do that. And of course, this is a sad time for the world. We know that, we know about the migrant worker crisis here. We know about all the political problems that are taking place across the world. We know that lockdown has also seen Black Lives Matter take place. There's been so much violence across the world in this time. But the silver lining and the really beautiful part about this time has been a stepping back and a quietening, I think, on a personal level for so many people. And that has been magical, hasn't it?
That has been magical, but I can tell you the next few weeks is not going to be so calm and quiet for you. You've got a book coming out, man. You've got lots of...
it's crazy.
What's it going to be like? You've got like released... I mean, it's completely different from releasing a book during regular times. What is it all going to be like virtual?
Yeah, I suppose so. We had at the beginning of the year, we planned a bunch of like very big launches. It was a 4-city tour with like a follow-up tour like in the fall. And, it was all these things. But, a part of me is slightly relieved that I don't have to shake hands with hundreds of people or, smile on stages, things like that. I think the older I grow, the more I become comfortable with the idea that I am essentially an introvert. And that's fine. And that actually makes me a better writer, perhaps. But I will still be doing a couple of virtual events. And luckily, I'm comfortable with social media. So you will be seeing and hearing more of me. And I truly hope you make the time to read my book, Jhala.
No, I will. I will 100%. I'm actually looking forward to it. Like I said, I've started reading again after a while, so it may take me a few months to finish it, but I will get there in the end. Okay, but I'll read it. So this is coming out on the 21st, is actually being released officially.
Yeah.
But it can be pre-ordered now on Amazon.
Yeah, you can pre-order it on Amazon, or and I strongly support this. Local bookstores are now taking orders for it as well, and I really really believe in supporting independent bookstores. So
Save the bookstores. They're the worst off, man. The bookstores seem to be closing every day, especially the small local ones. It's really sad.
exactly. Yeah, and I know for certain that Bhari Sons and the bookshop in Jorbagh in Delhi are both taking orders. So hit them up, and they'll be happy to help you. And yeah, exciting times.
Yeah, and please follow Karuna on her Instagram page for all the updates on her books and all the poems that she's been writing and all the posts. I assure you, you will not be disappointed. Thank you very much. And you can follow us also on Why Do I Podcast on Instagram. And thank you, Mrinalini Sen, by the way, whose house I'm at right now. I'm at Mamshi and Mrinalini's house. Mamshi is the one who does the music for our podcast, which you'll hear at the beginning of every episode. It's such a cracking track. And actually, I took the name of the podcast from the song rather than the other way around. And Mrinalini does all the amazing artwork that you see on our Instagram page. So thank you for both of them as well. And thank you, Karan Ravi Shankar, who's probably listening to this, who's producing this and is going to help get this out there in the future. Okay, guys, thank you very much for joining us. See you next episode.